KMJ.
Fresno's focus on Campaign 2020 is right here. This is Ballot Boxing on News Talk 580 1059 KMJ. Now your host, Aaron Abadia.
First guest this weekend on Ballot Boxing is Dr. Nathaniel Cogley, a political science professor from Texas. The big story, obviously, out of Washington is impeachment. And the House this week has voted to impeach President Donald Trump on 2 articles, where it now goes to the Senate, and the contention is always high. Dr. Cogley, welcome to KMJ.
Aaron, thanks so much for having me. I'm actually originally from California, both San Francisco and Nevada City, and now I'm working out in Texas.
Well, what a move. It seems to be very popular with folks these days, leaving the Golden State for Texas. That's probably the biggest recipient of Californians packing up.
Well, in academia, you need to be geographically flexible. So that's what I've done, and that's where the career led me.
Very nice. Well, I'm sure you've been following religiously the process of impeachment and the latest developments on it. I know it sounds kind of like a dumb question to ask, but I must. Do you think anybody was surprised to see the vote come out the way that it did, with the Democratic majority in the House voting to impeach the president?
There were a few surprises. Tulsi Gabbard voting present was very interesting. She's running in the primary for president. That's not going to do much for her presidential campaign, but it's quite a bold move on her part to do that. Also, I'm surprised that some of these, we talk about 31 Democrats from Trump districts, and this is going to be a very difficult vote for them. They're all a little bit different. So Trump won those districts by different amounts. Trump won those districts, some by 1%, some by 10% or 13%. I would have thought there would have been more defections amongst the Democratic members from districts Trump won by a lot, by 15 points or 13 points, and there wasn't many defections. We saw Jared Golden split his vote amongst 2 articles. I thought there would have been more of that. Now, we just went from a midterm cycle where the opposition usually does well. Coming up into a presidential election year, we would expect that Trump supporters will come out more since Trump's on the ballot. I would have suspected already that the Republicans would gain seats in the House, but that the Democrats would hold their majority. I think the vote on impeachment here is going to bring the House even more competitive, because some of these people made a vote that's very difficult for their district.
What happened with Nancy Pelosi? She had originally, 2018, when she regained her speaker role, had hinted that impeachment wasn't worth it. That was almost a verbatim quote. She said that Donald Trump wasn't worth impeaching. Did she have to cave to some of the members of her party that were a little bit more to the left, or why the shift?
She has a very interesting position. She has 2 roles. She's Speaker of the House, as everyone knows, and that leads her to try to be moderate and do what's interest for the party and try to help protect those Democrats from Trump districts. But she's also representative from San Francisco. And of course, I grew up in San Francisco and I love San Francisco. But this is one of the most Democratic districts in the country. And I think as the media was pushing this, that Trump should be impeached, it got up to about 84% of Democrats believe Trump should be impeached. It's very difficult for her to be seen in her home district as the obstacle to impeachment when that many Democrats want to impeach. And I think at some point it just became a bit much for her. California has this top 2 system, and ever since they began those top 2 system in 2012, she's always faced a Republican or an independent in November. Usually 10% is good enough in her district to qualify for that November ballot. And if she faces a Republican, it's an easy win for her. She can do anything. She'll be reelected. But as you know, sometimes in California politics, it'll be 2 Democrats in the top 2 positions, in which case she hasn't been in a competitive election since 1987, and she doesn't want to start now. And there are some Democratic Socialist Bernie Sanders supporters. There's a gentleman, he has a law degree from Stanford. He's very articulate. There's another young lady running. And she does not want a Democrat to come in second to face a Democrat as her only opponent in November. And I think she needed to move now to consolidate support amongst Democrats to hopefully ensure that it's a Republican in second place, not a Democratic Socialist.
A lot of talk just after President Trump won in 2016 was impeachment. It started from almost, the get-go. Following his inauguration was he's got to be impeached. That was the sentiment on the left. What would you say the average opponent of Trump, who in most cases are Democrats, although there's some Republicans who are in opposition to the president, what do they base the majority of their desire for him to be impeached on? Because it kind of seems to be all over the map. In your studies of this as a professor, what would you say the majority of people wanting the president to be impeached kind of base that desire on?
Well, I think they base it on the passion amongst their voters in their district on this one. We've never been close to Trump actually being convicted and removed, So if someone actually didn't want Trump to be president and say, well, they want someone else, this isn't the path. There's never been close to 67 senators willing to do this. Nor on the Democratic side is President Mike Pence a goal for them. But the timing of this impeachment vote is very interesting. It's timed right before the primaries. This is the time when America gets the most partisan it ever gets, is right before the primaries, where people are participating in their inter-party fights. And so this timing of it, the Democrats have to do what's passionate on the Democratic side. I think this is appealing to the voters. And Trump has his supporters. He goes out and does rallies with 30,000 people and puts on a show. And there's a lot of Trump supporters. But there's a lot of hatred for President Trump. And some of that's coming out of the way he's been covered in the media. Some is out his unorthodox style. But I think this is to kind of to feed the passion amongst the voters. It's going to be tough to be a Democrat in a Democratic district and say, no, voters, you're wrong. Trump shouldn't be impeached. He's the duly elected president. We just need to beat him next time. That's a tough message to sell.
We're talking with Dr. Nathaniel Cogley from the great state of Texas, a political science professor. Dr. Cogley, there's been concern that impeaching President Trump on what his supporters would say is nothing. It's a baseless impeachment effort. Sets a dangerous precedent that now the opposing party, the minority party, anytime they disagree with the president, can begin the process of impeachment, and it basically amounts to a stunt. Where do you see this going, being that we've had so few presidents in the nation's history who've been impeached? Do you think that it sets a dangerous precedent?
Well, this is the first time that divided Congress has impeached. We see the Democrats have the House and Republicans have the Senate. We've never seen this before. Andrew Johnson, the Republicans had both chambers. During Nixon's time, it didn't get over to the Senate, but the Democrats had both chambers. And in Clinton's time, the Republicans had both chambers. It's very interesting that she was moving on it clearly without control in the Senate going forward. And the dangerous precedent here is that there's not a clear crime that was done. That abuse of power charge, Trump has every right to request an investigation into activities in Ukraine in 2014 to 2016. Former vice presidents and their sons aren't immune. We have a treaty with Ukraine on assistance in criminal matters. Trump also has every right to temporarily defer funds within the fiscal year. That's the Impoundment Control Act of 1974, Section 684. Makes that very clear. He has a right to do it. And so they're not claiming that he didn't have the power, or at least not in the actual resolution. They claim in the report, but not in the resolution. This is a motive crime. They're saying he made decisions with corrupt motives. So I think that was page 3, line 24 of that resolution. And so we're impeaching a president with a divided government on a motive crime. And I think that would be a very dangerous precedent if we're going to start using impeachment so loosely based on what we assume someone's motives are. And again, the funds are released, the meeting happens, so they always say it's attempted. It's assumed because the evidence is weak. It's attempted because it's never happened. And it couldn't have happened anyway. Impoundment Control Act says if you're going to permanently rescind the funds, that has to go through Congress. So we're impeaching a president because we assume he was attempting to do something he can't do. I do think that is a dangerous precedent for the future, but I'm not sure this is going to play well for the Democrats come the election. I think they're going to be in a worse position than they would have been if they had avoided this. So I'm not sure that there will be the political benefit to encourage this too much in the future.
Another thing that we hear a lot about these days is an attempted coup, the deep state. There are all of these big buzz terms. Do you think that there's any validity to that? I mean, is this a soft coup? Is this the deep state, or is that just rhetoric used on the campaign trail?
Well, I don't think this is a coup. It doesn't involve force, and also it's not effective. This is not going to get through the Senate. You need 2/3 of senators to pull this off. But I do think there is something to, quote unquote, deep state, which is people that work in the federal agencies who kind of think presidents come and go, and the presidents are there to keep doing their policies they've been up to. But the CIA is not in the Constitution. The State Department's not in the Constitution. Attorney General's not in the Constitution. It's the president that's Article 2, and he's head of these agencies. And we've seen a number of things where President Trump's coming from outside politics, and he gets into this position where he's the commander-in-chief, he's the chief executive, he's our head of state. And a lot of people feel like he shouldn't have that ability to make decisions and revisit some of the deals that America's in. When he decided to pull out of Syria, General Mattis said, don't pull out of Syria. And when Trump did it, he resigned. There was kind of conflict. And Mattis was thinking, I'm the military guy. You're not. You should defer to me. And I think there's a lot of that going on in the State Department. We're the diplomats, not you. You should defer to us on these policies. And in the intelligence agencies, too. We already told you what happened. You should defer to us on our judgment. When, in fact, the president is at the top. They work in his executive branch. And so I think Trump has been there. He's had clashes because he's violated some norms that people are used to, not necessarily the Constitution itself. So I do think there's been this kind of struggle with people in the agencies to come to terms with the fact that President Trump came in here to shake things up, and they may not be pleased with that.
What do you think this looks like in 2020? Because that has been the appeal of President Trump, that he's unorthodox, that he really doesn't much care about the way it's been done for hundreds of years. But you have this struggle, and even within the Republican Party, you have probably the folks who are leaning a little more libertarian, and then you have the more country club Republicans, as they're often called, who like the status quo. What do voters really want to see in 2020 when they head to the polls? Do they want to see a president who's going to return America to what they believe was the status quo, or do they want President Trump to continue in some ways dismantling what we've seen for decades, if not longer?
Well, the voters are divided on this. They're divided on Trump. There's a lot of passion, but he's an incumbent president with a very good economy. We've had relative peace and prosperity in his time. And the matchup is important. And what's going on in the Democratic primary is the people who are good matchups against President Trump haven't been gaining traction. Someone like Governor Bullock out of Montana, that guy had a resume. He can win Republican states. He was head of the National Governors Association. He was likable. They cut him off the debate stage. He couldn't even get any traction going. And you have people like Biden, who I've never thought was going to be the nominee. He's never had a successful run for president before. He's gaffe prone, and he's a little past his prime. Someone like Bernie Sanders, an avowed socialist, this isn't a good matchup. Warren's not a good matchup. I don't think Buttigieg is a good matchup. And so the matchup is important. Now, they only need one nominee, and by golly, if they can get a good matchup, they can make this a very competitive election. But as of right now, they're struggling to find out who's attractive to that 40 million Democrats that will participate in their process is not who's attractive to the 140 million that are going to vote in the general. So I'm looking at Trump as still a 2-1 favorite in my mind. And this recent impeachment vote, the House is up for election every 2 years. I've been saying presidents don't gain houses, presidents lose houses. A president hasn't gained a house since the 1948 elections when Truman was president. I still think that would be a big moment if the Republicans gain the House. It's just become more plausible based on this impeachment vote. It's going to be a close House, and it's going to be a close Senate.
Would you say that Joe Biden's supporters, because he has been mentioned as probably the only guy, I've heard a lot of Democrats, spanning pretty wide on the political spectrum, say that Biden is the only candidate that has a chance of taking on Trump in 2020. Would you say that Biden's appeal is that he's the man with experience? I mean, it almost kind of is divided on generational lines. You have people from the older generation who see spending time in various positions of government, be it in the Senate or a cabinet position, in Biden's case, former vice president. Do you think his resume is about the only thing he has going for him? Because, as you mentioned, he's gaffe-prone, not exactly youthful, and you contrast that to President Trump, there's a pretty good difference.
Yeah, Biden has that resume. That's why he's top in the polls, still in the national polls. But when the states get closer to actually doing their primary caucus, he's no longer in the top. So if we look at Iowa and New Hampshire, he's like third place at this point in those states. And once he starts losing states, that kind of sense of inevitability is falling apart from him. You know, I think the best matchup of people who are actually running right now would be Michael Bloomberg, who's a man of great personal accomplishment, executive experience in New York City. It's just Bloomberg getting in so late, skipping the first four states. You know, he's going to do a amazing ad buys as people watch football. There comes on a Bloomberg ad, and he'll get votes. He's just not going to be able to steamroll this into a majority of delegates because other people will be winning those first four states, getting momentum, both people on the left and someone in moderate. And I've been predicting since last summer this is going to go to a brokered convention. Not only is the field fractionalized, it's fractionalized in multiple places. It's fractionalized on the left between Sanders and Warren. It's fractionalized in the center because Biden was supposed to be the one, but he's not inspiring confidence. So people like Klobuchar and Buttigieg, they're in there. Bloomberg getting in is going to fractionalize this even more. But the Democratic rules in their primary actually encourage brokered conventions. So every state is a proportional state by their rules. It's not winner take all in terms of delegates. Any candidate getting 15% is going to receive delegates. So we can imagine every state the delegates are going to be going in 2, 3, 4 directions. That's going to make it less likely to have a majority. And the new rule this cycle for the Democrats is that they're super delegates, not delegates coming out of the states, but the party insiders. They don't get to participate with votes at the convention unless there's a brokered convention and it goes to a second ballot, thus creating maybe an unintended incentive that the superdelegates might want a brokered convention.
California has moved its primary up to March. For years, the state has complained about not having a big enough seat at the table, being that the primary was in the summer, not in the late part of winter. Do you think moving California's primary to March is really going to have any meaningful impact?
Well, yeah, it's going to be a Super Tuesday state. So Super Tuesday is the Super Tuesday results matter. It's also not a state that's easy to campaign, door to door and diner to diner. I mean, this is a big state where what you need is media buys, you need radio buys, TV buys. California is a state it was supposed to be Kamala Harris's state. If we remember, she's senator from California. Her strategy was to survive, do well in South Carolina, and then parlay that into good success in California. She seems to have dropped out before any state has its caucus or primary, even though she had $40 million, and the goal was, make it to California. So that opens up that someone else might be able to do well. And my hunch here is because California is so big and it's going to be a media buy type state, Bloomberg may be able to get to that 15% threshold, not maybe win California, but get a good chunk of delegates coming out of it. And whether it's Warren or Sanders doing well on the left, one of them may get delegates. But yeah, California's importance is increasing by moving up in the schedule.
Dr. Cogley, we are fresh out of time. It was a pleasure to have you here on Ballot Boxing, and there is never a shortage of things to talk about in politics, so hopefully we'd have you back soon here on KMJ.
Well, Aaron, I love being on your show, and I love doing a segment with you on air in California, so I'll be happy to come back anytime.
Very good. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon.